I'd just left a 9-year relationship and taken a job 3 states away, the kind of fresh start you tell yourself you need. About 2 months ago, I decided to drive the whole way instead of fly. Just me and too many hours of desert highway to think. I found a motel about 40 miles past the last gas station, one of those single-story strips with a buzzing neon sign that still had half its letters lit. The clerk said I was lucky. It was the only place open for miles, and most nights in the off-season, I'd have the whole row to myself. My room was at the end, next to a laundry room whose door didn't quite latch shut, just clicked against the frame and drifted open an inch. I figured it was old hardware and didn't think twice about it. Around 1 a.m., I heard gravel crunching somewhere out past the parking lot. Slow, uneven, like someone walking without a flashlight. I told myself it was probably a coyote or another guest pulling in late. I checked that my door was locked and went back to bed. Then, maybe an hour later, I heard it again, closer this time, right along the side of the building, pausing outside my window before moving on. My rational brain wanted to blame the wind, but there wasn't any wind that night. I lay there a long time, listening, before I convinced myself I'd imagined the pause. Around 3 a.m., I got up for water and noticed the laundry room door was standing wide open, not just ajar. The coin machine inside had been shifted a few inches off the wall, like something had been braced against it. I checked my phone and saw the motel's front office camera feed, which the clerk had shown me stretched across an app the owners used. The timestamp showed a shape crossing the frame at 2:47 a.m. Not an animal, a person, moving low, hugging the wall the whole way down toward my end of the building. There was no explanation left that made sense. I called the front desk with my hand shaking. While I was on the phone, someone knocked twice on my window. Not the door, the window. If you're new here, everything on this channel comes from real accounts. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. When I turned, there was a man standing just outside it, still as a photograph. He wore a reflective vest like a maintenance worker, and when he saw me look, he tilted his head slightly and said, muffled through the glass, "Ma'am, I just need you to open up. There's a water issue in your unit." There was no maintenance scheduled, no water issue. He didn't move, didn't blink, just kept watching me watch him. I grabbed my keys and my phone, didn't put on shoes, and ran straight for my car. I didn't look back once until I was already pulling onto the highway, and even then I only looked in the mirror. The clerk called the police once I explained what happened from a gas station 20 minutes down the road. Officers confirmed there was no maintenance staff on shift that night, and the front desk had no employee matching that description on payroll, ever. They pulled the footage and matched the timestamp exactly to what I'd seen, but by the time they searched the property, whoever it was had vanished into the desert on foot. They never found him, and no one at that motel could explain who he was or how long he'd been circling the building before that night. There was nothing but glass between us that whole time, and I never would have known he was out there at all if I hadn't gotten up for water. I'd just gotten laid off after 4 years at the same company, and my best friend Priya insisted a road trip would shake the funk loose. No destinations, just the two of us and the highway. About 6 weeks ago, we found a cabin listing outside a tiny desert town, the kind of place with one gas station and a whole lot of nothing else. The cabin sat off the main road behind a stand of dead-looking trees, advertised as total privacy, total quiet. Exactly what we wanted after a year of Zoom calls and open floor plans. There was a rocking chair on the porch that the host mentioned in passing, said guests liked to leave it facing the road so they'd see the sunset. We didn't think much of it, just figured it was a nice touch. The first night, I woke up to what sounded like footsteps on gravel, slow, deliberate, circling somewhere past the tree line. Priya woke up too and said it was probably deer. She'd grown up rural, said deer walk heavier than people expect. I believed her, mostly, and we both went back to sleep. The second night, the sound came again, except this time it stopped directly behind the cabin, near the propane tank, for almost a full minute before moving off. Priya wasn't as quick to explain it away this time. She said maybe it was the property owner checking something, but neither of us really believed that. Not at that hour. The third morning, I went to check the porch and found the rocking chair turned a full 180 degrees, facing the cabin instead of the road. Priya swore she hadn't touched it, and neither had I. That night, she stayed up reading in the front room while I slept, and around 2 a.m., she heard the deadbolt on the back door turn, slowly, from a lock position to unlocked, even though we'd both checked it ourselves before bed. She watched it happen. There was no explanation left that made sense. We sat together in the front room with every light on, and that's when we saw him, a man standing just past the tree line, not moving, just watching the cabin with his hands loose at his sides, like he had nowhere else to be. He didn't approach, he didn't speak. He just stood there long enough for both of us to be certain he was real, and then, without any hurry at all, he turned and walked deeper into the trees. We grabbed our bags, didn't bother packing properly, and were in the car within 2 minutes. I drove the whole way to the gas station in town, with my hands locked at 10 and 2, and neither of us said a word until we were parked under the lights. We called the property host from the gas station, and after a long pause, she admitted something she hadn't mentioned in the listing. 2 other groups that season had reported a man matching the same description near the tree line, one of whom had also had a door unlocked from the inside overnight. She said she'd meant to install cameras but never got around to it, and that she was so sorry, but had assumed it was nothing serious enough to warn people about. Funny, the listing bragged about total privacy. Turns out we weren't the only ones out there who noticed it. My mum had been begging me to visit since my dad passed, and about a month ago I finally packed up my 2 kids and made the 11-hour drive out to see her, cutting straight across 200 miles of empty desert highway to save time. We stopped for the night at a rest area that had a small motor inn attached, more of a converted double wide than an actual hotel, but it had 2 beds and a working AC, and my 6-year-old was already asleep in the back seat. The owner, an older man who ran the place alone, mentioned that the ice machine outside our room stuck sometimes and not to force the door if it jammed. It seemed like a throwaway comment, the kind hosts make about every property, so I didn't ask any follow-up questions. Around midnight, my older son, who's 11, said he heard someone dragging something across the gravel lot, slow scraping sounds that stopped and started. I told him it was probably the owner moving trash cans, since I could see a dumpster near the office. He seemed satisfied enough to fall back asleep. An hour later he woke me up again, said the scraping sound had moved to right outside our door this time, and he swore he saw the door handle move slightly. I told him he was half asleep and dreaming, but I got up and checked the lock myself, and it was still engaged. Still, I left the bathroom light on for the rest of the night, telling myself it was just for him. The next morning, the ice machine door was standing wide open, and inside, someone had clearly been sitting. There were fresh handprints pressed into the frost on the interior wall, at about waist height, like someone had been crouched inside it recently. I mentioned it to the owner, and his face changed. He told me a guest 2 doors down had also complained overnight about hearing someone try their window latch, and when he checked her room himself, the latch had visible fresh scratch marks that hadn't been there the day before. 2 separate people, 2 separate rooms, matching the same story. There was no explanation left that made sense. While I was packing the car, I opened the trunk and found a man already crouched behind it, tucked into the gap between our car and the ice machine, so close I nearly stepped on him. He didn't run, he just looked up at me, calm, and asked if I needed help with the bags, like he'd been standing there waiting for an invitation the whole time. I grabbed my son by the arm, left the trunk half-loaded, and got both kids in the car. I didn't stop until we hit the next town 40 minutes later, hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel straight. The owner called it in immediately, and because the man was still on foot with nowhere to go in that stretch of desert, a deputy actually caught him less than 2 miles down the highway, less than an hour later. He gave no explanation for why he'd been on the property, and the owner admitted afterward that this wasn't the first season he'd had a drifter hang around the rest stop longer than made sense. My son still asks if we can go back and see Grandma the long way, and every time, I tell him we're flying from now on. My grandfather had driven long-haul trucking routes his whole life, and after he passed, my uncle and I decided to retrace part of his old desert route as a way of saying goodbye, just the 2 of us in his pickup for 3 days. About 3 weeks ago, we stopped at a roadside motel he used to mention by name, a place that had barely changed since the 70s. The owner's son ran the front desk now, and told us the motel backed up to an old maintenance yard that hadn't been used in years. chain link fence and all, but the units closest to it were cheaper, so that's what we booked. He mentioned the yard gate sometimes swung open on its own in the wind, nothing to worry about. That first night, my uncle heard metal creaking out near the fence line, on and off for almost 20 minutes. He figured it was just the gate doing what the owner's son had warned us about and didn't wake me to check. The second night, the creaking came again, except this time it was accompanied by a dragging sound moving along the fence, getting louder as it went. My uncle sat up for that one, and even he admitted the wind explanation was getting thin, but neither of us wanted to go out there in the dark to check. In the morning, we found the maintenance yard gate not just open, but the padlock that was supposed to secure it lying in the dirt, cut clean through, not broken. Someone had gone to the trouble of cutting a lock on a yard with nothing valuable inside, which meant they wanted access to the yard itself, not anything in it. There was no explanation left that made sense. That afternoon, the owner's son knocked on our door, pale, and told us a security camera mounted on the office, one he hadn't mentioned before, had picked up a man walking the fence line at almost the exact times we'd both heard the noises, 2 nights running. He turned the laptop around so we could see it ourselves. A man in dark clothing, methodically checking the fence panel by panel, like he was looking for a specific way in. That night we packed up early, planning to leave before dark, and while loading the truck, my uncle looked up and saw the same man standing at the far end of the parking lot, just watching us load our bags, making no effort to hide or leave. We didn't finish loading. We threw what we had into the cab and drove straight to the sheriff's office in the next town, where we filed a report and showed them the footage the owner's son had given us on a flash drive. Months later, the owner's son called my uncle out of nowhere. The sheriff's department had finally identified and arrested the man after a string of similar reports up and down that same stretch of highway, all near motels backing onto old maintenance yards, all matching the same method, checking fences for the easiest way in, before anyone realized he'd already found it. I still don't know what my grandfather would have made of that stretch of road looking the way it does now, but I know I'll never drive it again without checking the fence line first. This channel uploads new compilations every week. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. Leave a comment on which story hit hardest. I read all of them. See you in the next one.